best day ever.
It is the best day ever. So is yesterday, and so is tomorrow, and every day from now until forever. Do you guys ever think about dying?
We're going to devote our energies to sports and gardening, all the cultural pursuits as far as they're concerned. In fact, we're going to put the goons to sleep. Meanwhile, we dig.
Greetings and welcome to the Anadromist. This is Burn Power coming to you from Tbilisi, Georgia on a far too hot day. And so to cool myself down today, I went to see Barbie. And there are some of you right now who are probably reacting and saying, Burn, why are you watching that trash? And the point is, it's not exactly trash. There is something going on here. The film has been getting a lot of different kinds of reviews. Some very positive, some very negative, some not knowing what to make of it. All of them, I think, are worth spending a little bit of time thinking about. Not every review, but the different perspectives. And even, who is it, Gary at Nerdrotic, who hosts these kind of monster truck rallies of YouTubers who come on, like 6, 7, 8 of them at a time. We're having a huge argument at the beginning of one of their last Saturday Night Live sessions. And And some people were saying, no, it's anti-woke. Didn't you see the message? And other people were saying, no, it's totally feminist woke. And I saw Paul Vanderklay recently put out something, hi Paul, where he said, well, it's complicated and it's worth seeing. And I would concur. At the same time, and I think Paul saw this as well, there's some highly bizarre messaging going on here and propaganda. But here's what I came to understand. It's like the parallax view. You have two different eyes. They see the world in two different ways. And if you look at it from the woke perspective, you'll see all of your own ideals reinforced. Or are they? And if you look at it from the anti-woke perspective, well, on one hand, you'll see all this feminist nonsense and stuff. But on the other hand, you're going to say, hey, wait a minute, that is kind of what we've been talking about, except it's done as a joke, or is it? And so I decided to go today and to watch it. And I was not planning on doing a review of this movie at all. Or, if you look at my channel, I don't have that many reviews. But I said, okay, I have to talk about this. In this particular year, this movie is more than just a big box office. This is an extremely important year in cinema history as it's shaping up. And we're going to talk a bit about that. But before we do, let's get the ballyhoo out of the way. Ballyhoo was the old circus word for the promotion and the flummery and the creating the illusion of something you should pay your money for. Speaking of money, when I make videos, I don't get a dime from YouTube. I don't get a dime from sponsors. You can give me a dime if you wish. There is a link below, and feel free to do that. Also, like, hit, subscribe, whatever, because all of this does help me to get a few more views. My subscriber base has been almost flatlining for like 6 months now. And my channel has a few thousand people, and it stayed very similar. It's just slowly growing up and up. Do I care? Not that I care about the numbers that much, because I think I have some very loyal fans. Sorry. They're not fans. Oh, common language bothers me. Very loyal, what should we call them? Friends of the channel who appreciate what I've been doing. But here's the thing. it's very hard for me to get out of whatever ghetto I've been placed in by the algorithmic deities. And they really are like deities. Everyone knows they're there. You know, someone made comparisons to the algorithms versus believing in God. And the algorithms are a lot like, well, I think actually the algorithms are a lot less real than God. But they have, where are they? Who are they? What do they do? Nobody knows. Nobody knows how to make these things work for you. So, whatever. I've gone on too much about that. A couple of quick announcements before we get into talking about Barbie. Announcement A. Right now, it's pretty much over for going to the gathering in Georgia. I've got 8, possibly 9 people. That will have to do. I wanted to get 12, but so you would if you wanted to go, you would have to literally send me a message today, because essentially I'm done talking about it. The next you're going to hear from me about it is going to be when I start telling you what's going on. And some of the people may get together and do videos of their own about what they're thinking might happen. But essentially, I am done trying to promote it. I got other things to do. Secondly, I am getting ready for a fundraiser to try to finally bring my library from Alaska to here. And we're literally talking, I've got to get over $10,000. And, I have that much goodwill out there in the community? We'll see. I mean, I'll also throw the message on Facebook and everything. But here's what I'm going to do. I'm going to allow you to put me out of my misery. So there's going to be a day. I will let you know ahead of time what that day is. And it'll be a little bit later in the month when I just get on live and stay live. I worked at an NPR station in Alaska for 10 years. I know all about marathon fundraising, so I have to prepare everything. For one thing, how long can I stay on? Well, obviously, I can't sleep if I stay on all the time, so I have to take some time off to sleep and such. But I'll do this every day until I get as much money as I possibly can, because I just got to bring my library here. And I've got to do it before 2 things happen. Before my 5-year residency card is up in July next year, and before the elections in America, which I have forebodings about the crisis that'll lead up to them. So I really feel I need to get this stuff here, and people are more and more here getting the vision of why I need to bring the stuff here, because there's, it's all the stuff I talk about with you, so you know that. All right, so there's more, but let's talk about Barbie.
Since the beginning of time, since the first little girl ever existed, there have been dolls. But the dolls were always and forever baby dolls. Until...
So Barbie opens with an image you've probably seen before if you've seen the teaser trailer for the movie, of a parody of Stanley Kubrick's opening for 2001. And in the 2001 you have apes kind of skirmishing around, and then finally one of them picks up a bone and starts hitting another with it. The bone gets thrown into the air, and then one of the greatest edits in all of history, the bone turns into a spaceship. And what's amazing about that is Stanley Kubrick cuts out the entire historical period in one edit. And did bones hitting other humans create human consciousness? Yeah, find proof for that. So, but here we have a group of young girls playing with baby dolls, and they are, as they're playing, they're all pretending to be mothers and children. And of course, we are going to get a rather feminist message here that you don't have to give birth to babies to be considered a Barbie. And Barbie is, this is one thing Paul Vanderklay recently said in some of his ideas. Barbie is presented as an idol, just as the monolith in 2001. It's kind of an idol, but it's also this strange, I think the monolith in 2001 represents mystery, the mysteries of things we don't understand. But here, what's fascinating, and let me play you a bit of the dialogue here.
Since the beginning of time, since the first little girl ever existed, there have been dolls. But the dolls were always and forever baby dolls. Until...
all throughout history, girls have played with baby dolls. And I've just been reading books on dolls more recently, last year or two. And this is far from the truth. And in fact, most of the dolls throughout history that have been used by children have not been baby dolls. They have been people, usually women, often abstract figures, bits of wood, bits of cloth, eventually little statuettes. And is there a relationship to some of these statuettes and spiritual and religious realities? Oh, yeah. And so Paul is certainly onto something there. But in a sense, all art comes from religious beginnings, and it's quite complicated. But what's interesting to me is they start the whole movie off by giving you something that's actually historically inaccurate. The baby doll comes from the Romantic era, predominantly. There were maybe a few before then, but it was during the Romantic era where you start getting the porcelain baby doll for little girls to play with. And what's interesting about this is that the baby doll is coming to the fore at the same time that children's literature is starting to be written, at the same time where the Jean-Jacques Rousseau idea of the innocent child, born free but everywhere is in chains, but the innocent child is becoming a concept, whereas the innocent child was not a concept you're going to find anywhere in the Middle Ages or the Roman period. But this is, in this new idea, children go through this period of innocence. And many people will say, well, didn't Jesus say, unless you become as a little child? Well, yeah, of course. But he didn't mean that it's not that they are innocent. I mean, one of the aspects of becoming as a little child means you have to grow. Because that's what little children do. They all grow. They all go through questioning and such. We have such a small, narrow idea of what childhood is now. It's all age appropriate. I mean, I've seen the shrinking of the meaning of children going on, to the point now where people will proudly boast, I've heard YouTubers say this, I need to say this because I know some of you aren't going to agree with me, but I've decided to become not anti-child. They wouldn't put it that. Antinatalist. What is the word they use? Child-free. Well, basically, they're saying, I'm going to live my life and I don't need children. Because who really does? We can live much better without them. And I suppose it depends on what you mean by live. But this is exactly what's going on here in this historical fudging that's going on. And this is also the period, the late Victorian age is also the period where we're starting to get the hints of the cute, which will eventually, by the early 20th century, start to take over more and more of childhood entertainments. So, Barbie does not simply represent children playing with a full-grown doll. Barbie isn't the first full-grown human adult doll by any stretch. They go back and back and back in history. In fact, I'll show you some pages. I've been showing you some pages from a book called The Doll by Carl Fox. It's a big book that goes through the history of dolls. There's another book called Puppets, the Dolls and Puppets by Max von Boehn. And there's a great book of essays called On Dolls, edited by Kenneth Gross, which I highly recommend. Just to tell you, I'm not making up ideas here out of whole cloth. It's like, no, I've done my historical research because it's a field so closely related to puppetry. Barbie is born during the post-war era of the cheesecake pinup art and the beginnings of Playboy magazine. This is really important. She is a type of innocent Marilyn Monroe figure with what they used to call pneumatic breasts. The pneumatic drill, for instance, is a drill where air goes through it and is part of the powering mechanism. Well, pneumatic breasts meant that they would wear these conical-shaped brassieres, and it looked like the breasts were inflated. And Barbie's breasts are totally 1950s conical pneumatic breasts. And also the swimsuits, very 1950s. She is the new woman who fits into the era of James Bond. The new woman who fits into the era of the Rat Pack with Frank Sinatra and Dean Martin and Sammy Davis Jr., Peter Lawford, all these guys. She's the new woman of this idea of kind of a suave hipness that James Bond and Playboy magazine typify. But she is I want to say innocentified. Is there such a word? She's made more innocent for children. So, and yes, there is something going on here that's brand new. She is the new woman who, by the end of the 1960s, would already seem like a passé, ancient artifact. To the hippies, Barbie represented everything the opposite of them. For many people, the 60s were bouffant hair and hairspray and this idea of wearing, the mini skirts and polyester clothing and the early version of Carnaby Street in Britain. But by the time of the hippies arrived, and you now have this new massive countercultural rebellion that didn't want anything to do with James Bond, didn't want anything to do with the old, these early 60s, late 50s ideas of the suave, cool, sophisticated, organizational man. During the 70s, Barbie had problems, and they had to start changing her to match the times, so to create various ethnicities and such. She gets revived again during periods of post-countercultural consolidation, like the 1980s. Barbie, you can probably start playing with Barbie unironically again in the disco era. And then going into the 1980s with the big hair and the, polka-dotted pink dresses, the kind of things that showed up in rock videos. Girls Just Want to Have Fun, of which a snippet is heard really in the background of this movie. Once you get to the grunge era, and also all the underground stuff in the 80s wanted nothing to do with this kind of slick, MTV-style version of glamour, of which Barbie could fit in again. And of course, they made her more and more, they just made so many different types of Barbies. I once saw in the Czech Republic, up in the castle complex, there's a toy museum, which had pretty much every Barbie that had ever been made up until the year 2000, which is when I saw it, which was just absolutely mind-blowing to see them all in one place like that. As you can see, my interest in Barbie was not cultivated overnight by watching this movie. And in fact, in my playing with puppetry, I have mutilated and dissected and reapportioned body parts from several Barbie dolls. And in fact, I had a friend who made a whole series of dancing, like tomato soup cans with Barbie legs on them. Barbie parts are ubiquitous and worth playing with, for reappropriating for other things. But during the late 90s and early aughts, Barbie again, during the period of Britney Spears, comes back as this icon again, because she comes out at periods. See, the grunge era is not a good era for Barbie. The mid 80s is when teen culture starts up, the brat culture starts up in the late 90s and then goes into the aughts. That's a good period for Barbie. Barbie fits with Britney Spears and Christina Aguilera, although they're hypersexualized, and Barbie never was. But nevertheless, she fits in with those, what can we say, abstract glamour. They don't fit in the real. It's periods of time where reality is just seen to be boring, so we need to glamorize and accessorize it to make it unboring, to make it palatable. And that's where Barbie comes in again. What's interesting is Greta Gerwig is born in 1983. She doesn't look like a Barbie, although she is blonde and tall, but she's kind of got a stockier build. But she came of age in the late 90s. She was hitting like 15, 16, 17, exactly at the point when the movies like Scream came out, when Titanic came out, and in a way, this movie struck me a lot as being like Titanic. I looked around in the audience, and here it is, like 3 weeks after the movie came out. And it's a Monday, morning show, actually. It was 11:55 it started. And it's a fairly good gathering of people. I'm not the only one in the theater, as I was at the IMAX theater. There were only like 4 people in this huge IMAX theater the other day when I saw Oppenheimer, which was great because the sound system blew me out through the back roof. But here, there were, I would say, more than half of the people there were younger Georgian girls. More than one person says, this is not a movie for younger girls. And that's exactly who's coming to see it. Of course. Do they understand all the references? Of course not, especially here. But even the younger girls in America or Britain or whatever don't get all the references. Greta Gerwig is like a Woody Allen character from a late period. In fact, she was in one Woody Allen movie, the one where he went to Rome. Her husband, Noah Baumbach, and her are both make films in which talking is super important. So she grew up in the era of teen comedies and romances, and at the same time became kind of a hipster, of course. She made these what are called mumblecore movies, which I'm not going to go into talking about right now, but basically movies where the dialogue isn't super professional and such like that. But this is her very critical take on Barbie and celebratory take on Barbie all at once, which tells you everything you need to know about this film, which is why it provides 2 messages at once at almost all times. One, a critical message, the other, a celebratory message. And boy, do these messages get confused. So the movie starts off in pink, Barbie Land. Everything is pink. All the different Barbies are in charge. And here's what's really interesting. They've gotten every possible diverse representation of a Barbie possible. Diverse representations which I am sure don't even show up in actual Barbies. So there is of course, there's a trans Barbie, there's a overweight Barbie, there's a Barbie in a wheelchair, there's all sorts, although interestingly enough, at one point there's a pregnant Barbie, and there was a pregnant Barbie, but the joke is that they discontinued her, which makes a lot of sense given the opening scene. We're living in a perfect world according to a young, very woke, hyper woke girl. That's the important thing. I think Greta Gerwig knows that the world she's portraying at the beginning of this movie is completely impossible. Not just the fact that it's all toys who are supposedly dancing in a very Wizard of Oz kind of backdrop, but all pink and funny. I love the set design and especially the fact that the mountains are pink. And at one point, Ken tries to run into the ocean and hits fiberglass wave or something like that. And in fact, Ken here is very interesting because the Ken's existences, and this is pointed out specifically, are pointless. They revolve only around what Barbie thinks of them. And so all the different Kens are trying to get Barbies to compliment them and spend time with them. And in a way, the Kens remind me of, there was an old Milton Bradley game called Mystery Date. And there was a commercial for it. I never played the game because I don't think I was ever a young girl. What was I assigned at birth? So,
He's here! My mystery date!
Mystery date, are you ready for your mystery date? Don't be late, it could be great. Open the door for your mystery date.
When you open the door, will your mystery date be a dream or a dud?
Oh!
I think this whole movie is made for people Greta Gerwig's age, that is to say, late period Gen Xers, rather than young girls. But young girls are discovering it because there's so much visual pizzazz. I mean, is the movie a comedy? Well, yes, it's a comedy. Is it kind of laugh out loud all the time funny? No, not really. It's more just constant parody landscape. So, oddly enough, they have to go into the real world to fix this issue. And of course, I'm putting real world in quotes here, because this is not a world we recognize. For one thing, they go to Venice Beach, California. It's not a real world to begin with, Venice Beach, California. So you've got all these people posing and doing stuff. But then, guys come up and slap her butt from behind. Yeah, not so much today. I mean, all the men are portrayed as being these kind of symbols of a word. I think I don't know if anyone's done a word count on how many times the actual word patriarchy is mentioned once the real world gets in there, but it's at least 50 times or more after that. You just keep hearing the word patriarchy over and over and over. And I think Greta Gerwig knows she's being hyperbolic. And that's what makes the film work, actually, is the fact that she's one of these like I say, imagine a Woody Allen character in the movie Scream, Woody Allen character in any of these really kind of bizarre comedies. But it's that talkative person who's super self-conscious. And in fact, self-consciousness makes a big issue here. And it's the idea that the Barbies, who are all living in their plastic Barbie world, are becoming self-conscious of being representations, and I would say represented by various Hollywood talent agencies. But what's interesting is that this real world is not the real world at all. Nobody, if you were to just show people the real world section of this movie, you go like, no, that isn't the real world. It's a comedy version. And so, and like I said, Greta Gerwig knows that. So what's interesting, though, is Ken leaves after kind of taking this really bizarre version of, I want to go start a patriarchy back in Barbie land. He takes these books and such. I mean, this is all just completely ridiculous. Back to Barbie world. And meanwhile, he's starting to foment rebellion, which all of the women in Barbie world start to go along with. They give the excuse that they've all been brainwashed. They don't tell exactly how. But here's the weird thing. It's Ryan Gosling who pretty much steals the whole show, because his lack of agency in the early part, and then his mistaken interpretation of the quote-unquote real world, are actually kind of touchingly reflective of something that has happened in a more substantial way. And that is, as men have been sidelined, there is a quest among men, a quest to the point where they'll take figures as ridiculous as Andrew Tate as some sort of role model. There is a quest for men to find their identity or to know again their identity. And I think Ryan Gosling genuinely represents that, even within Greta Gerwig's context. And this is what I mean by the film has just so many contradictory messages. He steals the show because he actually feels it in some sort of way. He's actually being this puppet that's pulled by the Barbies. And he wants to break free and be a real person, but then he doesn't know what a real person is. And I would say that probably represents a lot of the people in the film. In a sense, the Barbies represent, I think, a younger girl's idea of if the world finally was totally woke and we put men in their place and we live in this perfect world, to which the answer is no, we wouldn't. But interestingly enough, some of the Barbies start getting converted back to not exactly who they were before, but a modified version of that. But here's the weird thing. How do they convert the rest of the brainwashed Barbies back to being who they were? Well, they have to use what has been traditionally called feminine wiles. They go in, they say one thing, they're doing another, they know how to distract men. It's like, tying a pork chop around their neck to get the dog to play with them. Not that they're doing that, but it's that idea of distracting them because they're so easily distractible. And I think that, however, has always been how women have exercised power. That is, traditionally, they may not have been the kings and the generals and the warriors and the farmers out in the field breaking the sod, but they knew how to put the screws on the men to get them to do what they wanted. And that has been what women have always done. That's what they go back to here, which to me is, after all the conversations I've had with feminists who say that, they want things to change, that's exactly what they don't want. But that's what this movie shows them as having the answer to. But here's the interesting thing that struck me. What's going on here is very different from what's been going on, say, in all of the last 4 or 5 years of Disney products from all of their subsidiaries. So Disney now owning Lucasfilm, Marvel, Pixar, Fox Studios, and of course their own productions of remaking animation from the past and all this other stuff. And what Disney's been doing is constantly throwing in this woke messaging, the messaging at the beginning of this film. But like the beginning of this film, there's no arguing with it. That is to say, it's just, you're wrong if you take an opposing view. So in a sense, Barbie at the beginning of this is the Mary Sue, the character who has no growth arc at all. She's just always happy. Everyone just needs to realize we're all chill. We're all quite groovy and nice the way we are. We should all be filled with the self-esteem we all naturally have, which is bullshit because that's not the way life hands out the cards. But by the end, there is at least a couple of interesting acknowledgments. One of the acknowledgments is that the men are having a crisis, which you would not find in any of the Disney or products that have come out. And there have been so many of them, from Captain Marvel to, all these different, diversity quota films and such. There's no acknowledgement that anyone might have another opinion and that opinion might be valid. This film, at least, if it's not all the way going back to trying to understand the reality of men and women, it's at least suggesting there is a problem, and what about Ken, you see? And it's also saying, well, what about Ken is the same as what about women? What about Barbie? So that's interesting. And that doesn't happen in Disney films. So to that degree, what's interesting about this movie is that in many ways, it's anti-Barbie. The whole way they treat the Mattel hierarchy, which I'm sure the Mattel hierarchy was both laughing at and nervous about, because Greta Gerwig is doing something very strange. She's being, and I hate this word these days, subversive. It's so subversive. It can't be that subversive if the largest companies on earth are producing this. So it's not subversive. And I'm almost at the point where I'm going to do a video on just the overuse of words like subversive. Just as a modus operandi, this film was anti-Disney. It's less so anti-Mattel and anti-Barbie, but there is a whole... There's a nest of things. And at the end, Barbie ends up choosing to be a real woman, changing her clothing, so she's no longer wearing pink, she's kind of wearing a pastel lime green. And is there a word for that? Tell me. And she goes to a gynecology clinic. Well, I could have my critiques of that, but here's what I'm thinking. 2023 is an extremely important year for movies. This is a transitional year, and it's happening in two different ways. One, we're seeing the collapse of Marvel movies, of Pixar movies, of Lucasfilms. The recent Indiana Jones film was a complete bomb. And we're starting to see the collapse of the entire Disney edifice. I just saw a documentary about how no one's going to the theme parks this year. Well, the big one in Florida, at least. Why? It costs too much. People don't have that kind of money. And I think people are getting tired. And I say this with great gratitude of Disney. Because, in fact, Disney has always been playing this game ever since the 1930s of holding out these like little cute and sparkling illusions and distracting you from reality with those. And for years people thought, well, Disney has always been safe for my children. And I've always thought those people were extraordinarily naive. But then this year has been a pretty darn good year for horror films with movies like Evil Dead Rise, Megan, and Beau is Afraid, the recent strange psychological nightmare from Ari Aster, who made Hereditary and Midsommar. Then we had the Mission Impossible Dead Reckoning was an interesting film. Oppenheimer, which I just saw, very interesting film. And finally, the most surprising film of all is Sound of Freedom, which they are just having, the Hollywood hierarchy and the media hierarchy have been lobbing grenades at this thing. And it is, the film was made for peanuts and has grossed well over $100 million by this point and more. And it just keeps going. Why? Because the subject matter is so important and people recognize when something is good. And that is something because what it says is something made for a few $1 million can actually go on to be very successful. The main thing all of these films are saying to me is the need for quality. I don't think we've quite reached the turning point yet. I think this is the transitional phase, but we haven't. In the 1960s, the turning point movies were, the first two were Bonnie and Clyde and The Wild Bunch. But the one that really changed everyone's thinking about the new Hollywood was Easy Rider. Easy Rider was made for peanuts, made millions and millions of dollars. And that's when the Hollywood executives who were on sinking ships said, okay, let's give some money to this guy, Francis Ford Coppola. Let's give some money to this George Lucas guy. Let's give some money to this Steven Spielberg guy. Let's give some money to Brian De Palma. Let's give some money to Martin Scorsese. And that's when everything started to change. Unfortunately, the 70s was too dark to sustain that. And what arose from that was the optimistic stuff, the stuff that had wonder and fantasy connected to it. And that created the next era, which we can safely say now, and with joy I say this, is dying. But here's the thing that's really striking me. The only other film I've really talked about this year is Megan, Mithrigan, and then there's Barbie. And what do they both have in common? They're both dolls. And I don't think this is an accident at all. Symbolically, the doll is the thing people have been seeking to become more and more and will seek to become. But Megan is connected to AI, and this is nothing if not the year of AI. I wouldn't be surprised if Time Magazine in their Thing of the Year says AI at the end, or something like that. And Barbie is a doll who has represented this weird sort of perfection, and Megan represents the dark side of that perfection. And I think between there, we get an idea of where we actually are. Now, there's a lot more to say about the imagery of the doll and the imagery and what AI means. And that's why I've been making experiments with AI, because I want to understand what it's going to do. I don't want to just be someone who shuts my eyes and said, oh, I got off the boat there. You can't really get off the boat. So let's wrap this up here. Okay, well, those are my thoughts on the Barbie movie. And more importantly, those are my thoughts about where we are now with movies in 2023. And why this, I think, is as transitional a period in movie history as the period from the late 1920s into the 1930s, when talking pictures came and the Depression came at the same time. And in the late 1960s, going into the 1970s, when the old Hollywood studio system crashed completely, and the new countercultural ideas were starting to take off. And I think where we are now is the old blockbusters of the quote-unquote new Hollywood. The blockbuster system is over as we knew it. People are getting so tired of, franchise sequel number 6, of the next woke Disney product, of all of this kind of stuff. And they're showing it at the box office. And I think that's good news, because it needs to die. It's just been going on. And it was one thing when the movies were good, even as late as the end of the Marvel Infinity War and all of that. It was pretty good. 2019 was a pretty good year for movies, I would say, all in all. But there were these signs of things going downhill even then. I mean, there have been a lot of problems all the way along. Let's not fool ourselves. But essentially, we're in a period where we don't know where we're going, but there are interesting signs on the road. So, from Tbilisi, Georgia, this is Byrne, inviting you to come along on the road. And remember, this video is your last chance to come to Georgia in October, and you should watch the Gathering in Georgia videos, which are around here somewhere. This is your last call. Heed it or don't. You're going to miss something very interesting if you do. From Tbilisi, Georgia, where they say droabit, which means temporarily. We will meet again.
A people without history is not redeemed from time. For history is a pattern of timeless moments.